A recording has started.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Board of Finance first quarterly meeting on November 16th, 2020. We'll call this meeting to order. Can we all please stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic,
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A typical quarterly meeting. For the most part, we do have one voting item, and we promise to do that first. And then we'll hear from our JRIB chair, Carolyn Trabuco, and then we'll go on with the first quarterly updates. Then we will adjourn. So, do we have Mr. Bill Hurley or Ms. Kupchak? Would you asked me to say that you'd like to say a few words before we start?
Yes. Unfortunately, I cannot stay for this whole meeting, but I just wanted to have a moment of personal privilege, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Thank you.
So I obviously, we all know that your chairman, our town's Board of Finance chairman, this is his last meeting this evening. And I wanted to take just a minute or two to just acknowledge Jim's 12 years of service on the Board of Finance. It has been an extraordinary term of service. And I would use words like humility, kindness, generosity, listening, good listening skills, honor, integrity, and leadership. And I just wanted to say personally, without maybe crying, that it has been a pleasure to have you help me these last 2 years, my first 2 years in a very difficult job, I might add. And I have really appreciated your leadership, your friendship, and your help. So I just want to say that Godspeed, Mr. Brown. And I know this is not the last time we'll be seeing each other because we actually are friends. And we will be seeing each other in much more pleasant circumstances than Board of Finance meetings. But genuinely, I sincerely want to thank you, not just on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the town of Fairfield for your service.
Well, thank you, Brent. I appreciate that. And I'll say a couple of words at the end of this meeting. But while you're here, I just want to reciprocate and thank you for your dedication to this town, all your hard work, what you're trying to accomplish. It's very much appreciated. And yeah, these 2 years that we've been working together have not been easy due to COVID and tough budgets. I mean, it's never easy, but of course that throws a nice wrinkle into it. And I appreciate our ability to work together and trying to get things done for the benefit of this town. So I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed working with you, and I want to thank you. And you know, I appreciate our friendship as well. And we will work together, or not work together, but we will definitely get together. And I look forward to that. So thank you for your kind words. Believe me, they're very much appreciated. And I thank you for that.
And thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Brenda.
Good night, everyone. Have a good meeting. I apologize, I can't stay.
No problem. Thank you.
Good night, Brenda.
Good night.
Okay, we'll go to item number 3. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution as recommended by the Board of Selectmen entitled a resolution appropriating $3,729,800 for the costs associated with the replacement of the Duck Farm Road Bridge, authorizing a grant to reimburse $2,983,840 of such appropriation, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance a portion of such appropriation. So can I have a motion to put this before us, please? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Testani. This motion is now before us. Mr. Hurley, welcome. Thank you for being here. and want to thank our bond counsel, John Stockton, for being here as well. And so, Mr. Hurley, we'll turn this over to you.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me, right?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to also thank Jared and the bond counsel for helping write the resolution there. I know it gets a little complicated, so. But anyway, Duck Farm Road is a collector road. It serves neighborhoods, schools, and highways. The bridge was constructed in 1959. It will have a 72-foot clear span and will maintain the same 30-foot roadway width, and it'll include a pedestrian sidewalk on the south side. The final design for the bridge has received approval. The contract bid process is scheduled for December 2021 as required by the Connecticut DOT. The bridge has had a poor condition rating, and you might recognize it as it's been on the waterfall chart for several years with the design, right-of-way, and now the construction process. The construction phase of the bridge is anticipated for 2022. It will be in the $3.73 million range, and that's based on the most recent project authorization letter or agreement from the state. The project has been approved for federal funding through the Federal Local Bridge Program, in which the town will receive an 80% reimbursement of eligible costs for the construction administration, inspection, and construction costs for the project. The bridge should have a 75-year service life before it would need to be rehabilitated or replaced. Project is bonded as part of the capital budget of 2022, and the town should be reimbursed 80% of the eligible construction costs. And just wanted to highlight that the engineering and the consultant firm, we had held 2 public informational meetings, and there was also an inland wetland meeting where the public was able to speak. The construction schedule, if things go well, we're hoping only 1 construction season, basically from April to the very beginning of December, but realizing that, supply chains, are utilities involved, that it might, if there's a winter shutdown, then obviously it carries into the next year and probably be more of an 18-month schedule. But we're going to try to do our best to do it in the 1 construction season. And if we have the opportunity to have the utilities start maybe in February or March, we're going to try to do that. So I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. I'll turn it over to the board for questions. Ms. Marmion.
Thanks very much. I just want to go to your reliability of cost estimate, item number 4. You give it an 8.5 from 0 to 10. And so that's taking into consideration issues with that we've been hearing about, supplies and rising costs of materials, et cetera. We're just trying to figure out whether or not you're confident in this dollar amount you're quoting as the budget.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident. It's the best information that we have. It's every month the state they do a release of estimates on the construction projects, and so the PAL was just authorized in October, so it's relatively recent, and the engineer's estimate I think was in September, so they're fresh. These are not from a year ago or back in January. So this is the best information we have for that, and when we go out to bid, obviously we'll have a better idea. The project does have a 10% contingency also for that as part of the standard state practice.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned you held 2 meetings, public meetings. Did people come out? Did they express concern with traffic? This is a major area where a lot of traffic, a lot of school buses, et cetera. Are you prepared to handle kind of the diversion of the traffic, et cetera, and were the neighbors satisfied with what what you presented?
Yes, we have been working with the neighborhood. The attendance was, it wasn't high, but it wasn't only a couple of people. I want to say it was probably somewhere between a half a dozen to a dozen people, mainly from the neighborhood or people who live on Duck Farm or maybe Alma, is it Alma Drive, or some in the neighborhood there. Um, uh, the other option besides closing the road is to have it one lane at a time. That would be a little bit more expensive, and it would definitely mean probably a 2-year construction phase for that. We did I'm going to say about 8 years ago, the Mill Plain Road Bridge, and that has a higher volume, and basically the detour is reversed, and so we would have a similar detour, but now people will be using Mill Plain Road. That would be the scheduled detour, but the town, we've learned in the past, and again, people have their ways and their phones or whatever, but as reminders, maybe even at the four-way intersection or even up a little bit further north in Greenfield Hill to remind people that the bridge is closed, and then maybe they could take a different route and kind of spread so that Mill Plain doesn't get the brunt of everything. Obviously, if you were going in a west direction, you might take a western detour. If you take if you're more to the east, you take a different road. Obviously, if you're going to the south, it all depends, where you're going to go. But we'll have our scheduled detour or posted detour, but we can certainly put reminder signs and maybe suggestions so that we spread it out more.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Testani?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Bill. How are you? Thanks for
fine,
coming. Good to see you. Just curious on the timing. I know you've alluded to it. I'm just wondering, is it like who's projected to be working on it? What kind of is it strictly Public Works, or like who are the actual people doing the work, I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay, well, the process here is that we had a design consultant, WSP. We have in place WMC to do the inspection.
Okay.
The state liaison, BL Companies is involved, and then they'll have the MSAT, the team from the DOT, just to make sure all the paperwork that's involved in these grants are properly filed. We meet the DBE requirement and Title VI and all that kind of stuff. And and then by putting it, we're going to putting it out to bid early December, and so we will have based on bids that will be reviewed by the state and the consultant and the town. Then we would award it to the probably the lowest bid contractor, unless there was an issue or an error in the bidding. Then we'd go to the next one, and then they're all going to be pre-qualified before they even bid on it. So these are going to be people that the state's very familiar with. And as I said, perhaps even the town, as we've probably done a dozen bridges now in the last 20 years. So we might be familiar with the contractor or maybe not. It might be somebody new. But we will hold a pre-construction meeting, and then we have bi-weekly meetings or twice a month meetings with the contractor and the state. That to make sure the project stays on schedule and abides again by all the grant parameters.
And there's someone from the town that oversees that at the actual site itself as well?
No, the inspection, that would be WMC would be the one that we hire them because they have to be there every minute the contractor is there. And
Right.
then myself or someone from the engineering department would probably go out there once or twice a week or as needed to do additional
That's my question.
inspection. But we have 24/7 basically coverage.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Here's the most important question. Is the Starbucks going to remain open?
Well, I'm not closing it down.
Good. Just as long as it's accessible, Bill. That's all I care about. And I can get to the train station. That's number two.
Yeah.
So,
Well, as I said, there'll be other alternate routes. We'll have a posted detour, but the people in the know, or as I said, with our reminder signs, we're going to try to spread the detour out a little bit. And we found that it worked on Valley Road and it worked on Mill Plain Road.
right. Okay. Thank you so much. Good to see you. Thanks again.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board? I am seeing none. So I'd like to make a motion to waive the reading of this resolution and just go with the motion. Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Walsh. All those in favor of waiving the reading, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that is unanimous. So now we have the original motion before us. Any further questions on the motion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It is unanimously approved. So thank you, Mr. Hurley, and good luck with your project.
All right. Well, thank you as always. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, Bill. Have a good night.
Sure. Bye now.
Thank you all. I'm signing off too. Happy
Yep,
Thanksgiving
thank you,
all.
John. Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.
Glad you weren't needed, actually.
So am I.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay, we're gonna go to item number 4, to review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. And we have our JRIB Chair, Ms. Carolyn Trabucco, with us, and welcome.
Hi
Ms.
there.
Trabucco.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Before I begin, Jim, I wish you the best. Thank you for your leadership on the Board of Finance.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the work you do too, Carolyn. So, but thank you for your comment. Appreciate that.
So let me, the material for the JRIB is the link to the backup. It's in the revised backup, and it's page 18. I'm going to be referring to kind of page 18 of the backup. So I'll give you a second to get there. I'm going to be commenting on the performance of the period, the quarter ending September 30th, 2021. I'll start with pension, then I'll go to OPEB. Pension performance, the market value of the pension funds on September 30th was $474.4 million. The performance for the pension fund for the September quarter was positive 0.38%, so a positive 38 basis points. The quarter overall is characterized by a lot of market choppiness. There were concerns over tightening financial conditions, concerns over the debt ceiling. This was the period of time in emerging markets when China, Evergrande, there were concerns over whether or not they would make their debt payments. There were shortages in natural resources, and if you recall, that's when commodity prices really moved up, including the big move in oil. We started to see real concerns about inflation, and the yield curve steepened. So it was quite a choppy quarter. The allocation of the pension funds, the allocation toward equity was 53.7%, and that remains split 60-40 between US and non-US equities. The fixed income portion of the fund was 33.4%, which was split 70-30 US to international. We maintain a 4.9% allocation toward real estate and a 7.4% allocation toward private equity. Cash was 0.7%. And all that you can find on that page 8 of the presentation, your page 18 of your backup material. If you look closer on the next page, that's when you can see the performance of the pension fund versus the benchmarks broken down by asset category. And we performed well against our benchmarks, even through this pretty choppy period of time. I would call out the continued really strong performance of private equity. I can take questions on pension, or I can move over to OPEB.
Okay, any questions on pension?
Okay. Moving over toward OPEB, which starts on page 11 of my handout, but I guess that would be page 21 of the revised backup packet you have. The OPEB market value was, for the September quarter end, was $75.7 million. The performance for the quarter was negative 0.55%, so a decline of 55 basis points. Obviously, the same market conditions kind of applied in that quarter. The allocation for that quarter end were 72% equities, split 60-40 international versus US versus international, 20% allocation toward fixed income, which was split 71% US, 29% international, and 7.7% in real estate. The slight underperformance was really related to the equity exposure at the time. I'm sure you can check your own portfolios and you've seen the market has kind of rallied since then. So I expect kind of that these numbers will be reflective of a very choppy period of time and not necessarily reflective of the overall performance. When I come back to you with the December quarter and results, I would like to share with you a couple of things that we've done within the JRIB. We signed the documents to invest in the Harbor Fund private equity fund, both for pension and for OPEB. There'll be a 10% allocation. It will be drawn down over time. And we've seen kind of the initial reports from our prior actuary, Hooker and Holcomb, for the year regarding the funded status of the pension fund. And as last year was, we kind of showed a number of 78% funded that reflected difficult market conditions. And I asked you not to read too much into that number. I'm going to ask you not to read too much into this next number that I'm about to share with you, but I'm excited for it. And just please bear in mind, we are still exposed to the markets. But in the pensions, we came in north of 95%.
That's great.
Okay. So you'll still have the ADEC, but it was a pretty spectacular fiscal year. And we're excited for what that means for the town.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any questions? Mr. Walsh?
Carolyn, thank you for that presentation. And I know you said it's not going to affect the ADAC. Will that be rolled in over, I guess, the next 5 years, I guess, that amount? Or it all depends on the choppiness on how things go from here?
I don't have a good answer for you on that. And the reason is because of the 5-year smoothing that happens with the numbers, and how that will all come out. I think Jared Schmidt, our CFO, might have a closer read on that. He's the one who'll deliver the news to you. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
No, yeah, I was just going to confirm that the whatever gain there was will get on an actuarial basis will be phased in at 20% a year over 5 years. And so and just to reiterate what Carolyn said, that's on a market basis. That north of 95% is on a market basis, and so it's not typically what we what the rating agencies look at, and they're looking more at an actuarial basis, which we will get. They're working on it now. We did send to Milliman the GASB disclosure numbers, which are north of 95%, and so they're going to take those into account as they put forward the actuarial basis of what the funded status is for both OPEB and pension.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Carolyn, to clarify, so that funded status with the 95%, that's market value as of June 30th?
Yep.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Flynn?
Sorry about that. Do we know when the town's going to deliver, or when we're going to be delivered the number on the ADEC? They should be calculating that now, I would presume. So when are we going to know what the contribution should be?
It should be around sometime in January. We're trying to get a preliminary number, which we should get at some point in December, probably mid-December, I would guess.
Could we share the mid-December one just so we know?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Flynn. Any further questions? Seeing none. Carolyn, thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Okay, we'll go to item number 5, to review the Board of Ed fiscal year 2020, fiscal year 2022 first quarter financial update. And we have Ms. Laborious with us, as well as many members of the Board of Ed. So thank you all for being here tonight. And Mr. Cummings, I'll turn it over to you, but are we going to turn it right over to Ms. Laborious?
That I will do, Mr. Brown. I would like to have Ms. Laborious speak to our first quarter projections, please.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cummings. Thank you, Chairman Brown and Board of Finance for giving me the opportunity to present the first quarter financials to you. The first thing I wanted to do was just orient you to the reports. They look a little bit different. They're the same as what we shared with you in the final quarter. So on page 13 of your packet is a summary report that you'll get updated every quarter. This is a summary out at the major classification level. And on the top of that summary report is the projected balance. And on the bottom is the unencumbered balance. And then what follows is a series of reports that gives greater detail behind each of those items that ties to these totals. The reason we share the projected balance with you is because that projected balance will incorporate everything we know to date about what we expect to spend for the year, which includes expected and anticipated revenues as well as anticipated expenditures. And then the unencumbered balance is important for us to share with you because that is from our Munis system, our financial record, and it allows us to compare each quarter, what percent, unobligated that we have in our budget compared to a previous quarter, and we're on track with what we had seen in previous years, so 2017, 18, 19, with the balance that's unencumbered at this point in time. And so the next page, which is pages 14 through 16, are, as I mentioned, just a detail report by major classification. So it just breaks out in a little bit more greater detail, followed by on page 17, you would have the unencumbered balances, high-level summary, and then backed up by the detail. So for example, you'll see on page 17 that the unencumbered balance as of September 30th was $37,110,697. And then if you refer back to the high-level report, you can see that the unencumbered balance is $37,110,697. We're just showing it to you longitudinally so you can compare each quarter so that as we go through the year, we can explain where these projections or encumbrances have changed. That said, I just wanted to walk you through some of the details. The big picture, as you can see on the projected balances, is that we're projecting a gap of about 880,000, and that is mainly due to a higher than projected number of students requiring special education and related services. This was to be expected after the pandemic and also with trends that we're seeing throughout the state of Connecticut, with our sister districts as well. We do anticipate that this can be somewhat mitigated by savings with the utilities, with transportation, and possibly also with health insurance. We're going to continue to monitor those items and report back in Q2 as we have a clearer picture of the utilities, transportation, and we'll make recommendations for further actions to come into balance. And now I'll go into the detail sheet. So on personnel services, if you look to your report on page 14, and it's the one that's entitled Summary by Major Classification Balances as of 9/30 Projection, you'll see that there's a balance of about 454,000, and that's due mainly to two factors. One is attrition that's greater than planned, than we originally budgeted for. We budget for attrition every year with an assumption about, historical as well as an adjustment about the current condition. And our attrition is a little bit greater than we originally projected. And also, oh yes, I'm sorry. I'm seeing Jim has a question through the chair. May I?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, yes, okay. Mr. Walsh? Oh, Mr. Walsh, I believe you
I'm sorry to interrupt your presentation. You're referring to page 14. You just referred to it, correct?
Oh, I apologize. In the backup that I believe Caitlin sent, it might not be page 14.
Or in the PDF, we're on page like 49, 50.
Oh, I do apologize. I apologize. So 49 or 50, is that the one that's entitled Summary by Major Classification Balances as of
Summary
9/30?
by major classification, yes, is page 50. So that's the one you're talking
Okay.
about, correct?
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Yes, that is
No problem.
correct.
No problem. Thank
Okay,
you. I just
thank
want to keep up. Thanks.
Thank you for clarifying. So I apologize. On page 50, and I'll wait while folks get to that page. So on the top of that page, you'll see that in personnel services, we had a balance of 454K. And that's mainly due to attrition that was greater than planned. And we also had 5 additional retirees above and beyond what we planned. And that's part of a trend that's happening, throughout teaching, that retirements were a little bit higher than normal. We're also likely to see some additional savings in the substitute lines. We were using a 4-year average here, but these have been difficult to fill, so savings could accrue here, unfortunately, due to that difficulty. And then you see that the intern total is mainly a net of the 2 figures for special education and other. So it's mostly attrition and those retirees. The fixed charges were driven by what happens on the personnel side. We use a projected attrition and also an assumption about family size. And this could shift depending on life events as they occur, but we do set up an assumption based on historical information. The next category is pupil personnel. The bottom line total is a negative 2.3 million. The $2.5 million need in overall special ed services includes all estimated excess cost revenue, OTT, which is out of town tuition, the American Recovery Plan, IDEA, and also general IDEA revenue. The need was mostly driven by higher than anticipated outplacements and settlement agreements. At the time of this report, we had approximately 135 total settlements and outplacements and 15 planned, meaning, that we're not signed into agreement yet, but are either in process or we anticipate coming in throughout the rest of the year after September 30th, which was the date of the report. We also had additional professional services and speech per PPT recommendations. And overall, that 2.5 is offset by 200,000 in transportation savings, mainly due to lower than anticipated ridership or challenges with bus driver shortage, but we're still meeting the needs of transporting the students. We will continue to refine this number as well as the revenue figures, and our Q2 estimate will be more telling given that we will have additional time to complete the process for identification and services. Our school expenses have a balance of 441,000. This is mainly due to lower copier usage. We hope to capitalize on this in the upcoming financial plan with new initiatives and also to potentially partner with the town we've been talking about on copier services in future years. The support expenses include legal fees, technology, software and supplies, security purchases. Most of the savings here is due to lower, and it also includes tuition for our magnet schools, and most of the savings is due to the lower than projected enrollment in the magnet schools. There's some small savings in technology software due to items budgeted for remote learning that were not needed. And therefore, there's some savings there as well as less supplies and copying in the central office, as we were seeing in the schools. And the net need in security purchases is going to be offset by parking revenue. We just didn't book that revenue yet. So you'll see that go down once we account for that. In the maintenance, operations, and transportation category, again, we'll refine this. It does not include, we flattened the utility projections. We usually flatten the utility projections, meaning we say that we're going to use the full budget in the Q1 because we'll have a better sense of the heat days and some more experience once we're in the schools longer than just a month. We kept them flat for now. On the rest, we're saving about 2.5%. Of the service accounts, mainly due to savings in print management, lower than projected use of technology consulting, plumbing and heating supplies, and painting, offset by major needs and maintenance projects at various schools that both the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance have been made aware of. And then there's a small amount of projected capital savings. Tech has made a majority of their purchases, and we always hold off on school equipment purchases until the spring, and we're sure we can sustain the budgeted commitment. So then you'll see also on page 51, 52, if you'll bear with me, 53, starting on page 54 is the general statement of account that you're used to seeing as well, which includes our appropriated budget and the encumbered balances, which means the contracts out to date that we have already encumbered. And of that encumbered balance as of September 30th was about 80.68%, which is sort of on par with the trend that we'd see at this point in time. And so with that, Chair Brown, with your permission, I'll take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
Start with Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt. I'm in Pupil Personnel. As everyone can figure out, we are 207% spent on tuition in the first quarter. I literally don't know how to bring this up any more than I do every year at this time, in anticipation of the budget happening weeks from now. So, and frankly, I'm sick of hearing COVID is the answer to the answer for all these overages, because this is typical. So I really want to know from the administration, what are we doing to make sure that this number isn't 200% overspent in the first quarter next year?
So I'll just take just the first part, if you don't mind, on answering that, Mr. DeWitt, is that the 207% does not reflect the excess cost revenue. Our projection does. We're going to change that in future. We've spoken with Mr. Cummings as well as Mr. Mancusi to give you a more real-time sense. We typically in the past had waited until the excess cost numbers have been released by the state, so they tell us the percent to apply, and then we've had the experience and gone through what our transportation costs and our PPT and all the costs that go into the excess cost calculation. Once we get that revenue number, that's when we apply it to the budget, so you would see it as an offset. That doesn't negate the fact that we are over budgeted on the special ed tuition line, but I just wanted to point that out, that it's not to the tune of 207%. And in future, you'll have more real-time adjustment for that revenue.
Oh, okay, but so help me out. Maybe I'm reading this wrong. Your budget is $5.5 million, and
Yes.
you have already encumbered to date, September 30th, you've already encumbered $8.2 million.
Correct.
So I don't know what that percentage is. I know it's not 200%, but it's definitely over 100%, right?
Yeah.
So, that number is going to get better. It's not going to get a whole lot better, I can tell you, just from past history. But
Yeah, it doesn't reflect
we're
that
over $3 million. I don't understand the process.
So just technically, the 2.7 roughly estimated amount of excess cost will offset that number if you're looking at the encumbrance side. That's why we prefer to look at the projected balance side, and then I'll just have Mr. Mancusi answer on the projected balance information.
Sorry, what number will offset that 2.7 million? What 2.7?
So the number doesn't reflect, when you see the encumbrance number in the budget, it only reflects your year-to-date encumbrances, and it also, in our budget in Munis, it doesn't reflect the revenue offset. So there's additional encumbrances in that category that will happen throughout the year, and there's revenue that will offset to the tune of, we can't say for sure until we complete the analysis, but typically anywhere from 2.5 to 2.7 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Laborious, I just wanted to follow up on Mr. DeWitt's question because what you explained is what I thought I understood when I read your summary. It says here that the initial excess cost reimbursement received in February will be based on anticipated costs filed by pupil services in December.
Yes.
So based on December actuals, if you will, we're anticipating to get more reimbursement based on what we know at that point. What I'm still not clear on is what percentage does that look like? So if we have, $1 million in extra costs, what does that look like in terms of revenue reimbursement typically?
Rob, do
And
you
can
mind
we
explaining the
get
excess cost? I defer to my colleague through the chair if that's okay to respond about excess cost. Yeah.
Good
Sure.
evening, everybody. This is Rob Mancusi. In terms of the amount of excess cost reimbursement, that percentage is established by the state. Usually we project 73% excess cost reimbursement. Last year we got 79% the state reimbursed. That reimbursement rate is set for high cost students or high cost programs that are over our threshold, which our threshold is established annually. So this year our per pupil is about $20,000, I think $700. So in order to be eligible for excess cost reimbursement, a program cost has to be 4.5 times over that. And then we get the established percentage reimbursement in excess of that threshold. So say if our threshold was $80,000 and a student's program cost us $100,000 to implement, we would get back 79%, which was the rate last year. Doesn't mean it's going to be this year, but 79% of that $20,000 over that threshold. Do you understand? Is that clear?
I think so. So
We have a per pupil.
right. So in other words, we are only going to get that reimbursement to the extent that you have individual pupils with high costs, not if you had just more students who had these services, but they were sort of at that average cost. That would cause us to incur the cost, not be reimbursed. It has to be high cost students. And
Correct.
do we have any idea of what that looks like based on these numbers now?
In terms of what?
So right now we've said we're $800,000, net, or that's bottom line. What's the number for special ed here? Let me flip over.
2.3
All right.
million.
So yeah, out of the 2.5 million, I mean, the excess there, do you have a sense of how much of that extra cost would qualify as,
We're going through kid by kid right now for all our outplay students. And we're projecting what we expect our excess cost is going to be based on 73% or based on 70%, depending on, we don't know. We can project it. I've projected it. We've never projected 79% because that's the highest we've gotten in years. Usually we project 73%. Some years it's been below that. Other years it's been above that. So.
okay, so it sounds like it's early in the process, but you wouldn't take that 73% and necessarily, or we shouldn't have that in mind as applied to the total excess because part of the excess might not qualify. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that when I was speaking earlier to Mr. DeWitt, my response was about the encumbrances on the Munis report. But on the projected balances, we did incorporate an assumption about the excess cost. So that deficit or that gap that's happening is inclusive of the revenue. So it's saying there's an assumption that we will receive a conservative revenue amount for excess cost that's offsetting it. So that 2.2 is after the revenue is received.
Okay.
I just
All
want to be
right.
clear. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. I was really confused because I thought what I read and what you just said was the opposite of that. So you've been conservative, but you have assumed that you would get some revenue offset on these extra costs already in these numbers.
Correct. Just to be clear on the projected balances,
On the
but
projections, yeah.
and not in munis. So when you look at the encumbrances in munis, they appear overstated because the revenue has not yet been applied.
Right. So the projected balances that roll into that $800,000 bottom line already assume some excess cost reimbursement.
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Ms. Marmion?
Kelly, you're muted.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
very much. I just have a question in terms of what you're seeing as trends with special education. I know that we had put more money, more budget towards hiring social workers to keep people, keep students in school, in the Fairfield Public Schools, and trying to prevent the outplacement, which is very expensive. So, and I know COVID has been a real curveball, but just looking forward, do you see these increased outplacements for students as a trend that you feel is likely to continue? Or do you think that this truly is COVID related with all the pressures that COVID brought to the students with special needs?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. I would like to address Mr. DeWitt's, because I do appreciate, I don't want COVID to seem as like an escape from our increased costs. We definitely are in unprecedented times and dealing with unprecedented mental health issues in our schools at all levels. I do believe our in-district programs, which we have invested in a lot over the past several years, we're servicing the students we need to service, but there are students who have increased mental health needs that are challenging our ability to keep kids in district. So therefore, we've seen a big spike in the number of outplacements that we've had. We've also seen a spike in our literacy needs for students. We have recently received, and we're finishing the grant applications from the state. There are special education recovery grants that are made available to us in for about $201,000 that specifically targets dyslexia, specifically targets like our special populations, like our complex learner cohorts, or our programs for students who have intensive mental health needs, and then for just special education students in general, to provide some learning recovery activities. And we have $550,000 for those three areas that we have for 2 years to spend. So, I know that may have been a long-winded answer. COVID has definitely made special education much more challenging and unpredictable.
So just to follow up, I mean, I think part of it's obviously hard to predict, into the future. But from a trend perspective, when you look at projected costs for our next budget season, are you anticipating increasing this budget significantly?
Yes. And I will say between me and my coordinators and Ms. Laborious's office, we are combing through our projections. We're combing through, what we anticipate we're going to be dealing with, and then we factor out the students that we are graduating or the students who, may be exiting special education or returning to district from out of district. But I do anticipate a significant increase in that account.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add one last thing is that we did have an unfunded mandate in the age up. So, from the state where you know, kids, the age went up and our funding didn't necessarily increase to keep pace with that change.
And what Ms. Laborious is talking about there, and as a direct result of COVID, in July 2020, you know, students no longer age out of public school at the end of the school year in which they turn 21. We have to keep students now until their 22nd birthday. So that came into play when that initially came into play. There were several students that were unprojected to stay on because the law was still 21. So that's where, and that could, for those kids, those are our highest cost kids. So programs for our highest cost kids can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per student.
Okay. I hadn't heard that, so that's good to know. Mr. Walsh?
Thank you. Is that for any student in the whole system can stay till they're 22, till their 22nd?
No, that's a planning and placement team decision. It's for students who finish their 4 years of high school and the severity of their disability. There's still goals and objectives to work on, such as independent living skills, post-secondary training or employment skills, or you know, post-secondary education. But no, it's our 18 to 22-year-old population. Typically, it's students who attend our community partnership program, which we have 20 students in right now. So yeah, it's about 20 students a year, maybe 25.
It's all special education.
Correct.
You can't be a non-special.
No, it's our most disabled special education students. It's our nonverbal students, our students who have multiple handicaps, those types of students, severely disabled.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. DeWitt, you have a follow-up? I believe you're on mute, Chris.
Sorry, my apologies. For Mr. Mancusi, are those students at Walter Fitzgerald?
No, they're most of them are at the community partnership program or CPP program, and some of them are in outplaced facilities because we just.
I guess I don't know what that means when you say CPP programs. They're not in the traditional school system that we're familiar with, plus Walter Fitzgerald. Is that correct?
Correct. Walter Fitzgerald is our alternative high school for students who could have 504 plans, an IEP, or could just be general education students who need an alternative setting. That is a separate program from our community partnership program, or we call it the CPP. The CPP is for our most disabled students who need services beyond their 4 years of high school, 18 to 22. They're the students who, once they turn 22, the state typically services them through the state adult service agencies.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any further questions on these reports? Mr. Walsh?
Ms. Laborious, thank you so much for your presentation. I may be making some time with you to ask some questions offline so that I don't labor this meeting longer than it has to be.
Sure.
Just understanding a little bit better some of the numbers that are in the the summary by major classification.
Sure.
I guess one comment I have, and this isn't certainly, I just want to be clear, this is not a criticism of your presentation, but I think might help the board. I don't know how anybody else feels, but you know, that's when you go over that, that's kind of like a big dump of information. And I know there's a lot of information to present in a short amount of time, but sometimes it feels as though it's like a disclosure that someone's trying to read really fast.
Oh, I
And we're
apologize.
moving through a lot of stuff. And what I found on the town side is when they're making their presentation on their quarterly is we talk about, or the finance department talks about each of their categories, and then we ask questions along the way. And what might be helpful, and I guess we'll talk about it at the, we can talk about it as a board with the new members, is maybe it would be helpful as we go along, going through the major classification and summaries, that, after we say, talk about the first one, personnel services, that we stop right there, because sometimes you're giving us a lot of information, telling us the reasons why things are either better or worse than you expected them to be. But to ask the questions there, so that we're not having to jump all over the place after we go forward, so that we can handle people, services, and then handle all the questions for that section, and then move on to the next section. So I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that in general, or how you've done that in other places you've worked, or anything like that?
Yeah, that I would welcome that. That would be great. I think instant feedback is good, and I'm happy to take it more slowly, especially given that I'm new to the role. So I would appreciate that dialogue. It helps me also. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it just would keep the board focused on that general thing. And then if there's no questions, there's no questions. You've done a great job. You've explained everything and whatever. But if we wanted to drill down, I guess that would be the time before we move on.
Sure. That's a really good suggestion.
We're finished with that. So I don't know how the rest of the board feels, and maybe we should wait till we have our new members on board. But I just think there's a lot to digest sometimes when we go through that.
I think it's good feedback for the next quarterly, for the next board to decide. Does anyone want to comment on that now?
All right,
Okay, that'll come up.
everyone's in agreement, so that's great.
At least you'll be, Mr. Borges, I guess you can walk in your next quarterly meeting with that thought in mind and see how it goes.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
And going to personnel services, I think I heard you said that there was 5 more retirements than were budgeted for.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the savings on that?
The overall savings, I believe on the retirements was about 600,000, and I believe we were assuming four and change. So for each retiree, and I apologize, I don't have the numbers. I'll have to get that to you after, what we assumed versus what there were. And so I'll have to get that to you, Mr. Walsh. I apologize that I don't have it at my fingertips.
Say that we might want to anticipate that for a while, or did I misunderstand what you said about that?
No, we would go, I mean, in the next year's budget, I think we're having those conversations now. But to my knowledge, we're not anticipating that we'd see the number of retirements that we saw this year, next year. We're still part of those early budget conversations. Yeah, but I think we would go back to a trend number for next year, I would expect. Oh, and I see Colleen. Hi, Ms. Deasy is here also.
Yes, we are still working on that, but I do believe that internally we use an algorithm to predict it based on the number of teachers. I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself. Colleen Deasy, Executive Director of Personnel and Legal Services. Based on the number of teachers, both male and female, of different ages. So, how many teachers are 55, how many are 56? And that is what we use to predict the number of retirements every year. So we will continue to use the algorithm in our budget basis for next year's retirements.
Ms. Laborious, you, Mr. Mancusi, did a very good job going over some of the special ed costs and why they're over. Are there going to be similar costs? I mean, it can't just be that the special education children are the only ones that have fallen behind. I've asked Mr. Cummings this before, whether he thought that the non-special education students were also affected by COVID and the COVID learning programs, and he said that they definitely were. And so what amount of money extra are we putting towards the non-special education students, and where would that be reflected in these numbers?
Mr. Walsh, this is Mike Cummings. I can speak to that. And I appreciate the question because this is a group of students that can get certainly lost as we talk about these issues. If, those students who've been impacted by COVID and the term learning loss, break them into two categories by level. So you think about the K-5 students and then think about the 612 students. In the K-5 students, the intervention, the remediation services are being provided during the school day by existing staff. So there really is no additional cost to that. We've had to reprioritize some of the things that those staff do. If you think about at the elementary level, every school has a math science coach teacher, and they have at least 1.5 or 2 language arts specialists. We try to divide the time of those people relatively evenly between 50% even intervention and 50% coaching in the classrooms. This year, that percentage of time in the classrooms coaching has been reduced and in favor of providing additional intervention services. So it's a reprioritization based on need right now, and that's what's happening at elementary. At secondary, we're using the Arpa funds from the latest round of the ESSER grant, essentially to provide in the middle schools and high schools 2 hours of extra intervention per week. Each of the schools has begun their programs. They have identified student based on academic need, but also some of the social emotional support needs that kids might have. And they're running Mondays and Wednesdays after school. Part of the grant was to provide buses for students to make sure that transportation at least was not a problem for them. And we're paying essentially a lot of that money in the ARPESA grant is going towards staffing at each of the 3 middles and the 2 high schools. So that program is primarily after school.
Can I just jump in? Just to a reminder, hi everybody, Christine Vitale, I chair the Board of Education. And we also ran the Summer Boost program this past summer for our elementary school and middle school students to address learning loss as well.
And that was paid from the ESSER grants as well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Walsh, you kind of faded out. We can't hear you right now.
I'm asking this question to Mr. Cummings and Ms. Vitale. It's a kind of a similar question to that I asked last year, which was, I think Mr. Cummings, you addressed it at the time, and I asked you whether you were getting to the same curriculum last year that you expected to get to, and you said no, because of the challenges of COVID and what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting back to the 2019 level of curriculum, the material that is going to be supposed to be covered, or are we still not meeting that? We're, because of catch up and getting kids back to levels that they should be at and learning the way they should be learning, are we not covering the curriculum to the same degree as we were covering pre-COVID?
Yeah, great question. Mr. Walsh, we've reaffirmed this year, 21-22, that the curriculum coverage for each course, grade level, as well as the instructional expectations for all students is back to pre-COVID.
Excellent. And I don't know whether you know this question. It just concerns me with, obviously students who are preparing to go on to college, and as we prepare them to do so, and they take SATs and ACTs and things like that. Are those organizations, have you heard, are they, I don't know another word, I'm trying to think of a proper word, are they, I guess it's kind of a word like dumbing down their tests a little bit in order to be taking into account what happened with COVID, because some of these kids are still catching up.
Yeah, the educators would use the term recalibrate.
Recalibrate. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I will tell you, even personally, I have a son who's a senior in high school right now, and he's going through this process, and we've not heard anything either from a personal level or from a professional level that the courses have been recalibrated to adjust expectations for student performance on any of those assessments.
Have we received any testing on our students to show where they are and how they're doing?
We will be receiving, our students took the PSATs in the spring, and excuse me, earlier this fall. And those results usually arrive sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas break. So we'll be getting those results for our 9th and 10th grade students soon.
All right. Would we be able to get an update just generally on what that's showing you or showing the board?
Absolutely. We're going to be sharing that information with the Board of Ed, and we can certainly share it with other town bodies.
Are there any additional fundings that the board's been hearing or the central administration's been hearing about? The Biden administration may be talking about to help us more with some of these costs for special education. I can't believe we're the only ones this is happening. It has to be happening to every district across the United States of America.
It is. It's happening everywhere, and it certainly is happening in my conversations with superintendents. It's happening in all of our neighboring districts. I don't know, Ms. Vitale, was any of this discussion? I wasn't at the Cape convention on Friday, but was this discussed at all on Friday with the superintendents and boards of ed?
Nothing specific in terms of funding sources, but PAPS, the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, they just put their blueprint out for the next 5 years. And one of their priorities for the next year is to really advocate first at the state level to get that excess cost grant fully funded. As Mr. Mancusi said, it's been, anywhere from 70% to high 70s, really looking to get that as a starting point to 100%. Being that states receive federal funding, maybe they could use some of that federal funding to fill the gaps that school districts are facing. Because as you said, this is not a Fairfield problem. It's happening across Connecticut, across the country, and looking for help. So we will be advocating, not only to here in town, but also reaching out to our state officials as well to hopefully get more aid that's coming at the state level.
Vitale and I'd like to include Mr. Mancusi and Mr. Cummings in this question. I hear about, you're talking about the excess cost sharing formulas and you don't know what it's going to be. But to me, if I'm seeing that every district is going to be in the same situations that we're in, where we're having a lot more outplacements or excess costs, it seems to me the percentage would come down if there's a limited number of dollars at the state, correct? See, unless there's funds I don't know about. Like, it just seems like there's a pot of money. And
well, the state did get ARP ESSER money that stayed at the state level.
Okay.
It didn't get pushed down. So I think that some of the thinking is that maybe money that is currently at the state level could be reallocated.
Mm-hmm.
To help cover some of these costs.
Okay, but that hasn't been done yet. That's just a hope.
That has not been done yet, but that is really just some of the feedback we received at the CAPE conference on.
I think by our next quarterly report, we'd have more information about that.
Ms. Laborious is shaking your head. Mr. Peterson was also at CAPE. I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything, there were different breakouts. If any of your breakouts shared information that I may not be aware of.
No, I don't have any further information than you do. I mean, I might only add from the federal level that there's nothing in the Build Back Better plan that's being considered right now that would come down to the state for this purpose, and the difficult time that's having getting through just the House, and with hurdles to come in the Senate. I'm not sure I would look specifically to the federal government for more kind of targeted relief on this basis.
I mean, we're right now, our focus for the board is really just to have the interventions early on. We're piloting the early literacy program, and really trying to build capacity in district so we don't have to move children into special education and, of course, outplaced. Kind of prevent the cost before we get to that point.
Okay. Well, hopefully you'll have more updates at the second quarter update.
We will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. thank you to Mr. Talley, Ms. Laborious, Mr. Cummings, and Mr. Mancusi for the reports this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any, Ms. Marmion, and then I think Mr. Flynn has his hand up too. So Ms. Marmion, we'll go to you.
Thank you very much. I just want to go back to the personnel services. Are paraprofessionals under the special education substitutes line 3? Where are paraprofessional costs outlined?
I apologize as I'm, Mrs. Deasy is here as well. The paraprofessionals are included in on this particular report in the salaries and staff replacement line.
Okay, okay. So do you ever use substitutes for paraprofessionals to meet the needs of when you have don't have enough paraprofessionals?
Yes, we do. Yes.
So that's not because I'm just wondering because I've heard a lot about the fact that there aren't enough paraprofessionals right now, or it's hard to attract them. I know their contract is under review right now, but so you're not finding that there are additional costs related to finding paraprofessionals?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Are there increased costs that you're finding related to filling paraprofessional roles?
Not directly in the staff part of the budget. I think that is something that I would defer to Mr. Mancusi, that when we are unable to fill paraprofessional roles, we're not able to simply just fill them using a substitute. It is something that we are able to do from time to time, but there's also difficulty finding people who are willing to be substitutes at this point. So due to the staffing shortages overall, if there is an additional cost, that is something that is going to appear in the special education budget because we owe compensatory services to students when we are unable to provide them in a timely manner.
I will say, this is Rob Mancusi again. The shortage in paraprofessionals certainly is challenging us in terms of delivering our programs for our most complex learners, and our staff really has done, a commendable job, delivering the services with limited support. Or what we have had to do in some occasions, we've had to contract additional contracted services for our most complex learners. So we're able, to, continue to run programs.
So that cost is under special education expenses number 16 then, Mr. Mancuso?
If those costs would fall under Pupil Personnel, expenses. It's a professional expense or a contracted service. If we've had to, acquire additional contracted service to support students in programs because we're not able to fill para positions. We still have many, many open paraprofessional positions that we continually try to fill. At this point, there's just, a limited amount of people to choose from.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marmion. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you so much. And by the way, it's nice to meet you and welcome aboard. And I appreciate your preparation for your presentation. Being that it's the first time I've seen some of these reports laid out in this format, I've got a question about what I'm seeing.
Sure.
Are you basically saying the net of this all at the end of the first quarter of the school year is you're over budget by about $800,000?
Correct. Yeah, this includes all projected revenues as well as projected expenditures for
Okay.
through the end June 30. And so at the September 30th condition, we were projecting a gap of $880,000.
Okay. It also, you referenced, and I saw in that, and I'm going to use a round number, that with encumbrances, requisitions, and actual spending, you've already utilized about 81% of the overall budget for the year, which means there's about 19% left, or my rough calculation is about $38 million that's available. And some of that 38 million is able to be controlled spending, and some of that will be things such as utilities and the like that are uncontrolled. So some percentage of that 38 million is not available to be, for lack of a better way to put it, actively managed.
Correct.
So we're looking at about $900,000 on 38 million available, which is, again, rough number, a little over 2% when I look
Correct.
at it. My question would be, how are we going to make up that 8 to 900,000 when you're actively managing this right now? What's being looked at to manage this overage of $8 to $900,000 in expenditures at this point in the year?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Mr. Flynn. Thank you for asking that.
Sure.
One of the things, yeah, and so currently, in our projection, not in the encumbrances, our utilities are fully showing a full expenditure, so a full encumbrance in the and we do anticipate there will be some savings. There is some solar savings that hasn't been adjusted in the budget that we do expect that we'll realize this winter. We'll know better and we'll be able to do a better projection after we have more than just a month of experience. And that's why we kept that flat. Transportation, we're also showing a budget that assumes that we're going to be running our full fleet. We don't think that's likely. We didn't include that in our Q1 because it's still too early to tell what might happen, but we do anticipate that there might be some, unfortunately, bus driver shortages. We'll still be able to handle, the student capacity as we have been, but we do anticipate that there will likely be some savings there, and we'll have a better sense of that in Q2. In addition, we're hopeful that as we work with Mr. Mancusi, as he mentioned, we're sitting down sort of weekly together to fine tooth comb every aspect of the projections for this year for the tuitions and the outplacements as well as the related services. And we're hopeful that that number will be refined a little bit so that the need won't be as great. And we'll share that with you in Q2. This is a pretty conservative number because it's Q1. In addition, we do, as I mentioned, hold back any school capital equipment purchases. That money is considered to be utilized, every year in the spring, should the budget allow. So we do have funds that are set aside to the tune of a few $100,000 that aren't schools, unless it's an emergency, are not able to spend until the spring. They plan for those with a ongoing multi-year basis. So they're aware that that's the position that we're in. Mhm.
So we received a bunch of ARPA funds. They're not reflected in these numbers, and they're not available to offset any of the 800, the 900, even though, per Mr. Mancuso's explanation, some of this increase in spending is due to COVID-related items. That's not reflected anywhere in here.
I'll be clear. The ARP, funds, we
Yeah.
have, I'll say we had ESSER 1, I'm calling it ESSER 2, granted by different acts, and then we have ARP, which I'd call ESSER 3, but it's not really, it's the ARP ESSER funds. ARP ESSER funds are accounted for separately, and if you'd like, we can add that as a grant report for you. It wasn't considered prudent, and this predated me, so I defer to Dr. Parrish and Mr. Cummings to speak in detail about this, but it wouldn't be prudent to build that into our operational budget, as that could
Agreed.
cause a cliff. So the things that they're doing are shoring up some things that would give us longer term benefits, but are not necessarily part of the operational base budget.
Well, the only thing I'll say to that is I would hope that some of the increase that you're seeing in special ed, based on some of the commentary I've heard tonight, is short-term in nature as opposed to ongoing. I would
Yes.
hate to think that this is creating a new norm for what we're going to be spending in this area or the issues that
And
you put for the town.
I do thank you, Mr. Flynn, for reminding, because there is and in addition to the funds that I just spoke about, there is also ARP IDEA funding that Mr. Mancusi applied for and obtained that is assumed in this budget, in this projection, to be offsetting some of the costs.
So it is. Okay.
Yeah, the ARP IDEA. Mr. Mancusi, did you want to speak to that in more detail, or is that sufficient?
Yeah, I just wanted to say of the $499,000 from the ARP IDEA money, and some of this has to be obligated to required places. We did
Yep.
put about $401,000 toward this. The other special education recovery grants that we got, they're targeted for specific populations of students, such as dyslexia,
Yeah.
our CLC students, and then, just students with disabilities in general who have learning recovery needs.
So thank you. So I have two thoughts for you. Three thoughts. The first thought is, well, I agree with not putting the ARP funding into your operating budget, reflecting it here, and I understand that. There has been an issue in the past within the Board of Ed in the town where the Board of Ed was excluding some funds from their budget, right, and spending it on the side. And when we were looking, and this is a long time ago. This goes back a decade or so. And during discussions, all of a sudden it came up that we were actually spending on more on education than it was reflected in the budget. So for purposes of this, as you go forward, I would recommend that you put a schedule together that says, here's what's the operating budget was the 192. Here's the amount we're spending. But oh, by the way, we're also spending an additional X number of millions of dollars on this. So our total spending on education for the year is the higher number, just so that everybody's clear on exactly what we're spending on education. The second thing I would recommend, and I've seen this done on the town side before, I always refer to it as a ripcord analysis. I hate when budgets stop and say, hey, we're $800,000 over, right? I would like to see that it says we're $800,000 over, and here's the pockets we think we have to make up this 800,000, right? Even to the point where if you know that there's not money, and again, that can be a separate schedule that just says, okay, we just showed you that we're 800,000 over. Here, we're going to make some of it up in transportation. We're going to make some of it up in energy. We're going to make it some of it up in capital outlay. We're going to make it up just so that everybody on this call and even your Board of Education knows the areas that you're looking at to kind of make up that funding. Yeah, and I know it's the first quarter, so you're right. There's a lot of time. I heard a lot in your, and of course you're new to the job and you're just getting in, and I appreciate all that. You got to understand the budget and where there might be pockets of funds available to help out. So I get all of it. I would say the only caution I have is that obviously that 20% that's available now that might be able to be tapped to help offset this $900,000 issue we have. I wouldn't wait too long. I would start identifying and being proactive as opposed to saying, well, we think this, we think that, which I understand. I would say, what do we really need to start doing? Only because if this gets worse, and we're later in the year, your cuts and your decisions become much more draconian in my past experience.
Yeah, that's very good feedback. Thank you. And I will
Thank you
add
so
that.
much.
You're well. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. I will just add that Mrs. Vitale did ask us to include a full accounting of the ESSER monies, which includes ESSER 2 and the ARP ESSER monies. And we plan to do that at our board meeting on November 30th. So I look forward to bringing that to this finance committee, as the Board of Finance as well, in an upcoming quarterly.
Yeah, and thank you. And thanks for all your hard work. And Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak.
All right,
Thank
thank you, Mr. Flynn. Any further questions for the Board of Ed? Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Ms. Laborious, I meant to ask this earlier, but I just wanted to circle back to personnel services. In big picture, make sure I understand this. If I'm reading your summary correctly, it sounds like because of increased enrollment, we have in our projections an increase of 6 teachers at the elementary level.
Correct.
All right, but we're also projecting to be below budget on salaries even with that increase. So is that just a function of levels and salary differential, or that combined with vacancies? I mean, I do see that costs for substitutes are over budget, so I assume that the vacancies and the substitutes are playing in together with that, but can you just clarify how that's working?
Yeah, so the attrition factor, so when we do our budget, we assume an attrition factor, and even year to date, what we saw at the start of the year was there was greater turnover than we projected, so that attrition factor is greater because of those vacancies. So this budget does account for those 6.1 additional staff. And the budget projection, I apologize, does account for the 6.1 additional staff. And on top of that, we have the savings. So there's an actual, part of the savings is offsetting that additional 6.1 staff associated with the enrollment change.
It's more than offsetting that. Is that correct? Because we're showing a positive 571,000.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And that, again, that's salary differential and vacancies.
Correct.
Okay, so we're still hiring for those to get fully staffed, and just the 6 teachers. So understanding it's at the elementary school level, is that just sort of spread out? What level of enrollment does that correlate to? Additional enrollment did we have?
Mrs. Deasy, would you mind taking that one?
Sure, it is spread out, but it was primarily kindergarten, where we saw the greatest addition of unprojected sections that were added.
And how many children is that roughly?
That information I do not have available.
All right, I know we get enrollment numbers periodically. It's just helpful to understand maybe in the future or with the next projection, we can just understand that. But
Sure.
Thank you again for clarifying. I don't have anything else.
Yeah, we'd be happy to add that to the Q2, if that would be helpful. Yeah.
But that might be because people held back because of COVID, right? Maybe they just didn't send their kids to school. They wanted to wait a year.
Yeah, we
If
were.
If you look at the kindergarten enrollment last year, Mr. Brown, we saw that a decline last year from expected. So I think that your assumption there has some merit, that people held their kids out because of the uncertainty of the 2021 school year. Between that and an influx of new residents, we've done some enrollment projections, and we're beginning to look at long-term projections in some of our neighborhoods. I'll pick North Stratfield, for example, where we had been seeing some declines in enrollment. North Stratfield seems to have had a turnover of housing, a greater turnover of housing compared to some other districts, and North Stratfield actually saw an increase in staff this year. So between those two factors, I think that's what's driven the changes.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Any further questions for the Board of Ed? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to thank you all for being here tonight. Have a great rest of the night.
Well,
Thank you
Mr.
for your
Brown,
time.
Mr. Brown, before we leave you, I just want to thank you for your leadership for, what is it, 12 years, but especially these last 2 years that we've been working so closely together. I appreciate your support, appreciate getting through the pandemic, working with us to both deliver a 0% tax increase to our residents while still properly funding education through the non-lapsing account. This year, just moving the Roger Ludlow Middle School capital project forward so we could, just keep our district moving forward. You've always been an ally, appreciate the collaborative spirit, and look to you as a leader, and wish you much happiness in your retirement from this board, but I'm sure we'll probably be seeing you popping up someplace else. So thank you, and enjoy.
That could be. Yeah, thank you, Chair Vitale. I appreciate those words, and believe me, I do respect and in many ways admire the work you all do on the Board of Ed. That is a tough job. And I would say over the last 2 years especially. So appreciate your service and your words of support. And I appreciate working with you. and your whole board over the last 2 years, as well as the years before. So thank you. Appreciate it. And good luck to you during the budget season and as you go throughout the rest of fiscal year 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, we'll go to item number 6, to review the town fiscal year 2022 first year quarter financial update. Mr. Smith, thank you for being here. Ms. Bassi, thank you as well. So which report? We're going right to the operational variance as usual? Executive summary?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, Ms. Bassi, sounds like we'll turn it over to you.
All right, just before we start, I just wanted to make a quick introduction. Our new budget director has joined us, has joined our team recently, and he's on the WebEx, so I just wanted to introduce Frank. We're excited to have him on board.
Everybody.
Where is, okay, I see you now. Welcome. Welcome to the town.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you. Thanks, Caitlin.
So he's jumped in and he's already starting out with probably the hardest piece of our budget, which is the salary projections. But we have every faith and confidence that everything's going to go very smoothly this budget cycle.
I'm sure it'll be so smooth. Everybody will have no questions, and everybody will agree.
Looking forward to that, Frank.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, that's wishful thinking, and I wish you luck with that.
Nothing would make me happier, Frank.
Okay, so yes, we're gonna go right to the projected net estimated operational variance. And I don't want to, kind of burst to the bottom line, but let's just talk about the $8 million, which is a very large variance. I don't think we've ever come out with such a favorable estimated variance in a first quarter before. There's basically two things driving this, so we can kind of start with the revenue because that's where both of these large variances are coming in. And the first line really gets us almost $7 million of it, and you guys have probably read about it in the papers, is the Bradley Jack estate has sold, and we received $6.8 million in prior and interest. So that's largely our variance that we're kind of projecting for this year so far. That's your favorable number on the top line. Check in hand, in the bank. So that's a great start to the fiscal year. The second large variance, and I don't want to jump too much down the sheet, but is there's a state revenue piece that we received from the state. So we used their initial budget projections, and then they've subsequently updated it to say that we're going to get $1.1 million in additional pilot money this year. So those two variances alone kind of make up the $8 million. We can go through the other lines on the sheet, and there's some ins and outs, but those two right there are essentially around the $8 million that we're expecting so far as a favorable variance for fiscal 22. The second line item, if no one has questions on the first, that one's pretty clear. Again, check in hand. That was many years, I guess, in the making. Investment income. We're still struggling, as you guys are probably aware. We did reduce our budget from 21 to 22. We reduced it by about, I'm just using rounded number, $600,000. As you guys can recall from last year, we were under budget by about 1.4 is where we ended up in fiscal 21. We're just struggling with the interest rates. They're just not out there. Just to give you a feel, the SIF rate today is 0.09%. So there's just not a lot of opportunity on the investment income side, unfortunately. We're hoping that that's a conservative number, and we're hoping that the markets kind of change and that $1 million won't be realized. But as of Q1, we're gonna go with the -$1 million there. And the flip side to that is the conveyance. is clearly the real estate market, as we all know, has been booming in Fairfield. We saw a good fall. We've received in, just to give you a feel, about 1.1 million of the 2 million budget in conveyance. And that 1.1 was through the first week in November. As you guys are probably aware, the winter there's a lull, and then the spring market picks up quite a bit. So we're hoping our best estimate as of now is to be a favorable 750 with the conveyance, the recording keys, and all that the town clerk's office takes in. The next unfavorable number on the revenue piece is the ECC subsidies. That has to do with the new ECC center. And I think Jared and or the chief is on the line, but we assumed on our projection that the center will be opening in January. I believe Jared just has some high level thoughts on the timing, if you want to get into that now, Jared.
Sure, like you said, I'll make a couple of high-level statements about it, and then Chief Calamaris can jump in if he has anything to add. So basically, the delay is, which you've heard in the past, and we'll probably hear in the future. There have been supply chain issues, so anything related to, any supplies related to glass, metal, wire, and kind of electrical. There have been delays because of that. So the projection right now is to open in January, beginning to mid-January. In addition, they're still continuing to put the finishing touches on a contract with the employees of the ECC. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything you want to add, Chief.
Sure, I could just provide a kind of an overview if the board is interested in hearing. As Jared said, the construction of the center is nearly completed. It looks absolutely beautiful. It's top of the line and probably the most technologically advanced center in the state of Connecticut. We did have some supply chain issues related to the construction, and what happens is when, let's say, for example, we had these air conditioning units that we had some delivery issues with them. Well, then that slows down the process of other items that then get installed after those are installed. We're having some issues with we're awaiting circuit breakers for the server room air conditioning. This obviously has caused a cascading delay for other parts of the center to either pass inspections or complete other work. IT equipment is being installed in the center. One of the two primary network connections are active, and state of Connecticut is scheduled to install a public safety data network connection tomorrow, which will enable the 911 and collect systems for our dispatchers to use. Motorola is scheduled to install the radio equipment December 1st and December 2nd, and a conservative estimate is early January for the opening of the center.
Thank you, Chief. Any
Sure.
questions on the ECC while the chief is here? Mr. Testani?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Chief. How are you?
Doing well, thank you, Mr. Testani.
Thank you and the rest of the department, of course, and all first responders for your service as always. I just had a quick question on the ECC. We talked in previous meetings about at least Westport and potentially other communities contributing. Do you know if the town's received any money? Has there been ongoing tabulations of whatever we may have received for what's been constructed so far? And when do we anticipate getting further, for lack of a better word, compensation? I believe New Canaan may have been one of the other towns. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll let Jared speak to that.
We'll get reimbursement from the from Westport for the construction piece of the project. As far as the operating though, that, you know, that was kind of what Caitlin was referring to on the revenue side, is the lack of revenue coming from not just Westport, because they haven't been in for, you know, for the first quarter, but also the additional state revenue that comes along with that, that we will not get.
Thanks, Jared. And you may have covered this in another meeting, but is it my understanding that New Canaan is not contributing, although they're going to be using, I believe it's just the fire piece of the ECC? Do I have that right?
They will be contributing.
They will be, okay. And
Yes.
when do we anticipate this money, and how much do you think it will be from Westport and New Canaan? And just in my own curiosity's sake, how are you tracking that? Where is that in the balance sheet?
We will get quarterly payments based on the interlocal agreement. We'll get quarterly payments from each of them. You know, the payments will be broken up 25% into each quarter,
Okay.
from both Westport and from New Canaan.
Right. Okay. And when you say quarterly, you're speaking of fiscal quarter or calendar quarter, or what quarter are you speaking of?
Well, we'll get the total amount of revenue will be based on a fiscal year.
Right. Okay.
And they will come to us on, you know, so January to March will be a quarter, and then
The first quarter, right.
so on and so forth.
So we haven't received any money yet, correct, from Westport or New Canaan, and we won't be, if I understand you correctly, until the first quarter of next year. Am I right with that?
Yeah, probably not until, because we will bill it in arrears, so we probably won't actually get cash from them until the second quarter.
It won't be recognized.
Yeah, second quarter of next calendar year.
So this could still be at a deficit into the second quarter of next year. Am I right with that?
That's a possibility.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jared. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Mr. Mottola.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I thought, Jared, maybe this is a question for you, but maybe you can't get into any detail. I thought you said, or maybe the chief said, that you're putting finishing touches on the contract with the employees of the ECC. When were we originally supposed to open?
When was the center supposed to open?
Right, if you didn't have these construction delays or
Well,
supply delays.
What we budgeted for was a July 1st opening.
Okay, all right. Thanks for reminding me that. All right, are we all set with? I guess my question is, you don't anticipate any problems opening the center because you haven't effectuated a contract with the employees who are going to be running the ECC center. Is that a fair statement?
We're not anticipating any problems, no.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Further questions, Mr. Testani?
Yeah, sorry, I just meant to ask either to the chief or to Jared, will there be, sort of dovetailing off of Mr. Mottola's questions, a grand opening? Is there a date when, you know, perhaps, or would it even be open to the public? Let's say if someone wanted to come and check it out, will the Board of Finance be given a tour? You know, I'm just curious.
There's probably going to be a ribbon cutting to an extent. Like I said, this is one of the only one of its kind in the state. It is something to be celebrated, and I think that we will have some sort of walkthrough where the public can come and see the opening and see the center.
You know, anticipate when, Chief, that might be?
You know, they're working on tapping over the 911 system, and that obviously takes some testing to ensure that there's redundancy in place. I would probably say at the time that we are up and running and both or all of the systems are merged together from Westport, Fairfield, and New Canaan Fire. It would probably be somewhere around the middle of January.
Okay, great. Thank you. Don't forget our invitation, Chief.
I won't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for the chief or on this ECC subsidies? Seeing none, thank you, Chief, for being here.
My pleasure.
Caitlin, we're on Park and Rec.
We are on Park and Rec. There's a couple components that make up the anticipated favorable 210. 70,000 of which is the program. As you guys know, the trust fund is looked at every September 30th, and anything over $200,000 reverts back to the town. Due to the program not running the previous year and being conservative, we budgeted zero. So there's about 70,000 coming over from the Park and Rec Trust Fund. In addition to that, we're anticipating about 50K over from the rentals of Jackie Durrell. Anthony said everything is going great there, and they're about 2 years out in their reservations. And in another 90, he's anticipating in the field rental facilities. So his estimate is about a favorable 210 coming in from Park and Rec revenue in fiscal 22. The next one, fire marshal fees. I believe Chief McCarthy is on the phone to talk a little bit about fire marshal fees. As we discussed in last fiscal year as well, they're a little bit under budget. I believe the chief has some actual projects that he knows of, which is kind of what's causing this deficit. So if the chief wants to chime in.
Good evening, Chief.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your service for the past 12 years. We really appreciate your leadership and the ability to work with you. Enjoy your time away and your nights back to you.
Yeah,
I do want to talk a little bit about the fire marshal's fees. As you know, we projected 400,000 with a number of very large projects to come online. Year to date, as effective last week, gross receipts were 78,000. There is a large project at Sacred Heart, 2 more dormitories in a parking garage that will yield approximately 100,000. So probably at the beginning of or at the end of Q2, we will be somewhere about 50% of our annual projection. I do have and has gone through plans review with the fire marshal, building official, and zoning, 17 projects that would generate fees of various sizes, various amounts for the contributing to the total revenue. Some of those projects you may have read in the newspaper that have been tied up in litigation, and others that just have stalled. In particular, there are several very large projects that we're anxiously watching up on Black Rock Turnpike across from the Hi-Ho on North Park Avenue, just below the Parkway, and the Metro Center and Thorpe Street. You know, those are probably the largest of the projects that are in the queue. But I can't with any reliability project how they will fare in the second half of the year. But they do contribute to our concern as it relates to the projection.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Questions for the chief? Seeing none, thank you for your explanation, Chief. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
State revenue, Kate?
The next line is the state revenue, which I kind of alluded to earlier, the 1.1 coming in for the pilot from the state. So that was a nice surprise. And there's other smaller revenues, about 104,000, largely the end of our COVID funding coming through from previous years. So our favorable on our revenue is about, we're expecting right now about a $7 million favorable to budget piece on the revenue. Does anyone have any questions on the revenue piece?
Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Ms. Bozzi, on the state revenue, I remember, I don't know if I heard from, or read somewhere from somebody in our state delegation, one of our state reps, that pilot funding was due to a change in the formula. And so it's anticipated that would be, permanent, if you will, going forward. Is that also your understanding?
I can address that. Yeah, it is permanent. It's a change in the formula. It's also an additional appropriation that they added to it for. It's a new tiered system. So they took this additional amount of funding, about almost $150 million, and they created these tiers. And because we have this significant amount of college and hospital property, we were a pretty good sized beneficiary of that.
Terrific. Thank you, Jared.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Mr. Walsh?
Caitlin, going back to what Ms. Charlton was just talking about on the state revenue, is that kind of a guesstimate, or is that pretty sure that's the number we're going to be getting in?
That money actually came in, so it is a sure thing. It came in September.
Is that good, Jim? Okay. Any further questions on revenue? All right, we'll go to expenses.
Okay, on the expense side, there's a few notable items that we know about thus far. The largest being the vacancies. As you know, we're still kind of churning through the VERIC people and kind of hiring there. So between the churn and filling some of those positions, we're anticipating about a $500,000 favorability in vacancies throughout various departments. Park and Rec seasonal, again, that kind of goes back to the favorable revenue up on the top of the sheet. Due to the increased functions down at Jackie Durrell, he's anticipating a slight overage in his seasonal costs down at the pavilion for the year. The ECC savings, that went hand in hand with the Ecc Subsidies up top. So while we're getting less revenue, we're also seeing the savings on the expense side due to, employees and maintenance costs and utility costs that aren't happening because the center is not open yet. The DPW utility loan, that 175 was a budgeted item. I believe that was carried forward from fiscal 21. The loan was due to various energy projects, and that loan has been satisfied. So we are seeing a real savings. We have a letter from KSA Bank who gave us the loan for the energy project. We have a letter from them affirming that loan is retired and we are done paying that. So there's a real savings of $175,000 in a line in the DPW called loan repayment. Lastly, there's other slight unfavorable, about 85. The largest of that is our liability insurance due to the ransomware incident in May in the pipeline. So our liability insurance is anticipated to go up about $60,000. So that's the majority of the negative 85. So on the expense side, we're still seeing what we anticipate to be about $1 million in savings on the expense side. So when we couple that with the $7 million in our favorable revenue, that's giving us an anticipated favorability of about $8 million as of Q1. Are there any other questions?
Questions on expenses? Well, it's almost like we want to freeze time and just go with this 8 million. But we do have 3 quarters to go, right?
We do.
Ms. Charlton.
Thank you again. Caitlin, can you remind us how you calculate the projection for the vacancy number? Do you assume that all those vacancies will get filled as of a certain date? Or is, you know,
So
is that 500 in the bank at this point, or is that an estimate of the vacancy number for the rest of the year? And if it's the latter, when do you assume those vacancies will be filled?
So because we encumber our full-time salaries, I can compare the budget for every department, what's been paid, and who is actively in there now and what their salary is going to be through June 30, which leaves me an available balance. Then I reach out to the department heads to say, hey, do you have any vacancies? If so, when do you think you're going to fill them? So I reduce that availability from that point forward. Just to give you a feel for what's vacant today, there are 2 vacancies in the police department, a detective and a patrolman. There are 5 DPW vacancies, but they are planning on filling 3 in Q2. There's a couple on the assessor. Again, some of these are VERIC related. There's 1 in HR. And that's really about it for the full-time pieces. So what I do is, like I said, I take that availability, I anticipate when they're going to fill it, and then I reduce the available amount by those anticipated salary dollars for the remaining part of the year, and that gets us to about that 500,000.
Okay, so there's no broad assumption that's being used. You've looked at each individual vacancy separately, and you've got an estimate in there based on when the department head thinks that vacancy will ultimately be filled.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Charlton. Any further questions on expenses?
Jim, there's one other thing I wanted to say that I haven't, that I didn't put on the summary, because it happened somewhat recently. Storm Ida was recently declared a disaster. We're working with all the department heads to get an estimated cost for what that storm cost the department. The largest cost was, as you guys probably saw this in newspapers as well, was Lake Mohegan got hit pretty bad. Still going out to RFP, don't know exactly what that is, but that's anticipated to be about $500,000. But again, they're going out, that might be conservative. We have no real numbers on that yet, but Connie, our internal auditor, has reached out to the department just to get an estimated figure. So it was declared. We don't know all the rules yet, but I just wanted to let you guys know that that was kind of out there.
Okay, thank you. So we'll see that maybe second quarter.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caitlin. Any further questions on expenses? Okay. Thank you for your update, as usual, Caitlin. We're going to item number 7. To hear, consider, and act upon any communication. So, before I take a moment of privilege myself, Jared, anything for us?
No, Mr. Chair. Is this an appropriate time, though, for me to give you my best wishes?
Sure.
I just want to say thank you. You know, you've been, it's a tough position that you're in, dealing with all the personalities coming from the administration and from the on all fronts, and you handle it well. I kind of felt like you and I were starting to hit a stride as far as our communication, and knowing that the best time for us to talk was in the mornings and at like 8:15, 8:30 in the morning, and get things out of the way before our days got going. And so, but thank you so much, and your institutional knowledge was very helpful to me, and I appreciate it. Good luck to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work we did together, and your availability, and getting us our backup, and just doing your best to answer our questions and work with us as a board. And yeah, you do get to you do get to know what's our various schedules and what works. The morning's great because you never know what that day is going to bring, right? So
Right.
sometimes it's best to call in on the way to work where, you have at least 20 minutes of semi peace.
Right.
So, no, I appreciate the work that you do, Jared. And
Thank you.
you came in at a tough time right after COVID. And, you jumped on the wagon and we appreciate that as a board.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Mr. Matola.
So I'm sure you're going to have the last word, Mr. Brown, but I wanted to say a few things too. It's been a real pleasure serving with you, and I mean that. When people look at what we do and what a volunteer public servant does, such as yourself, you're a great example. And again, I'm going to miss you. I could call you up whenever I wanted to or text you like I used to do a lot, and probably still will after you leave this board, and you always would respond. You were fair to everybody. You were accommodating. It was a real pleasure serving with you. So I want to wish you the best of luck. And I hope to see you in town on occasion. So thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And the same goes to you. You served on many boards. I think you served on every board as I think about it. And, you're one that has served this town extremely well. So I appreciate your comments, coming from you, someone that's been in public service for a long time. So, yeah, thank you very much. And it's been nice working with you as well.
Good luck.
Thank you. Ms. Charlton.
I'm going to jump on the Jim Brown fan club train here. It sincerely was a pleasure to work with you, Jim. It was an honor. Brenda started off with a bunch of adjectives to describe you as a person. And I would agree with all of those. I would also say that you've been an absolute gentleman. And as a leader, I think I've said this before, but, I would describe you as just an inclusive leader. And I think that's the hallmark of a really great leader. You have been inclusive, fair, responsive to all of us. You always listen more than you talked in meetings. You made all of us a part of the process. And we will miss your leadership and miss you personally. And I just wish you the very best. Sorry to see you go, but I'm sure you won't miss some of the late night budget marathons. So good for you there. But again, such a pleasure serving you, especially, for me, as I was a new member of this board 2 years ago, to be able to come on board and be part of a team that you led that was really, I just felt we worked really well together as a board. We all had different ideas and we had disagreements at times, but I thought we were a terrific board and, really always kept our eye on doing what we believe was best for the town. And that's a credit to your leadership. So thank you again.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that and everything you brought to the board over the past couple of years. And in working with you, it's been a pleasure. And I agree, this board, all in all, has always thought and try to do strategically and tactically what's best for the town. And we've agreed on much more than we've disagreed on, and we've worked through it. So it's been a pleasure to serve with you as well. Thank you. Sheila? And congratulations, Sheila, on your reelection.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Listen, I just want to add and say it's been truly a pleasure. And all the adjectives that have been thrown around, professionalism is is another one that I would throw out there that, what I truly enjoy about this board, especially under your leadership, is that we can agree to disagree, and that's what it's all about. We have different perspectives, and um, you've brought so much in terms of your perspective, but I think we're all the better, and the town is the better for it as well, for having you as our leader. So best of luck to you. You'll be greatly missed.
Thank you, Sheila. I appreciate that. And nice serving with you as well. And you're another one that's been on, maybe not the Board of Ed, but every other board. So appreciate your service, and it's been nice working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, Jim Walsh.
Yeah, Jim, I'd be remiss not to say a couple of things because more than just being our chair, you've always been my friend. Think back to running with you in 2015, and what a great time that was for you and I to get as close as we did and to continue that friendship. But you know, you were gracious enough to become our chairman, and that's not an easy role. Mr. Flynn's on this call. He went through the same thing because it's kind of like herding cats. It's probably one of your larger cats, but anyway. But you were always very easy to talk to, both at this meeting and privately about things. Talked me into some positions sometimes. It made me see the other side of some things sometimes that I didn't always see, and for that, I'll always thank you. But you know, you've always been fair at this board. And that's really, when you're the chairman, that's really the main trait you got to have, because everyone's got to feel like they get a fair shake and that you're not being partisan, and you never really were. You let everyone speak. You heard all the points of view, and even had to come down on some members of your own party. So, and sometimes that's a hard thing to do. And have to go through your chairmanship through COVID and working through these WebEx meetings and all sorts of things. Did an exemplary job. But above all, you always came off and made our board look better because you were a gentleman, you were honorable, you were fair. For that, you always made this board look better. And for that, I thank you. And I also thank you for being my friend. I've got something private I want to give you later on. Okay. But anyway, thanks for being there for me. Thanks for being there for our board. Thank you for all you did for the town of Fairfield.
Thank you, Jim, and I very much appreciate our friendship and everything that, you know, just on the Board of Finance, what I and all of us have learned from you through your experience and what you bring to the table. I mean, you obviously you do your homework, and you're a great board member. I'm glad you ran again. I'm glad you'll be on for 6 years. You know, when we all run, 6 years looks like a huge mountain to climb, but then all of a sudden it's 6 years later, and we have to make a decision what we want to do. It goes by fast. You know, when I first ran 12 years ago, I had 4 kids in the public school system, 4 daughters, and now I'm an empty nester. So you know, where does this time go? But it does go fast. Jim, I appreciate your words, and thank you for just for, you know, helping us through some difficult questions and difficult times, in your background as a lawyer. And you know, 2015, yeah, it was my privilege to run with you, and you know, I'm glad we had that time. So just you know, I had jotted some things down, but we've said a lot of them. And Jim, congratulations on your reelection. Thank you for running again. And you know, for your 20 some odd year and running, another one that's been on every board, probably except for the Board of Ed. But it's been my privilege to serve on this board for 12 years. And I kind of remember my first meeting vaguely. And it's like being thrown, I think, as we said, in the middle of a movie, because there's no beginning, there's no end. It's just like you're there. And, you know, you're behind this table, you're behind this microphone, and Mr. Flynn, Tom Flynn is the chair. He calls somebody up, and that was hard to follow, Tom. You know, 10 years as chair. and someone starts speaking and you're thinking, okay, I have to kind of pretend I know what they're talking about. And the last thing you want to do is ask your first question to be some stupid question. So, but then that's why it's 6 years, I think, this term, because in 2 years, it's just not enough. You're just kind of getting your stride. And then 6 years goes by like that, and you got to decide to run again or not. So, yeah, many meetings, many nights, but for me, it was all worth it. It's been a highlight of my life. And I do appreciate even the tougher times. I mean, that's what makes it worth it, I think, in the end. We're providing a service. But you have, people like us that we're all in it together. So I enjoyed my time on this. And, I think this board does some great work. It has, and over the past 2 years, but the years before, we're overseeing our long-term obligations, or long-term commitments, pension, OPEB, it's all important. And controlling our debt, and of course, working with the other boards to control expenses and balancing that the much needed services that people need. It's like we heard from the Board of Ed tonight and from the town. So I think overall we've done great work. I appreciate everyone I've met. It's another advantage of being on these boards is the people you get to meet, not only on the boards of the Board of Ed, Board of Selectmen, the RTM, but the department heads in town. The chiefs that were on tonight. And you realize how hard these people work. And the vast, vast majority of them do the best they can for this town. I'm talking about our town employees and the Board of Ed. And I want to thank this board for your support on my 2 years as chair. I've enjoyed the role. And it is a great opportunity for me. And Chris DeWitt, thank you, serving as vice chair. I have to say you're a better vice chair than I was to Tom. I mean, you did a lot more for me, I feel, than I did for Tom. So I thank you for everything that you did. And Mary is secretary and being on chairing our committees. Thank you. And I do again want to thank you, Jack. Where are you, Jack?
I was just going to say thank you, Jim, and just quickly a reflection of your leadership attributes are you being self-deprecating right now in the speech to everyone, crediting others and you not taking the credit, another sign of true leadership. And I think one of the things, as the newest member of the board, you helped me tremendously to get used to the waterways, the way the meetings are conducted. I had a little familiarity, but you helped me to refine that as the meetings went on. So I certainly appreciate you putting up with me and helping me get educated through the process. And you and I did have the corporate world to commiserate about, especially during, I know a few people alluded to it, the COVID crisis, having a 0% tax increase for our residents that year and coming in with less than a 1% increase to the mill rate last year was, I think, just a true testament to your ability as chair to work closely with the administration, as you yourself have alluded to do what's best for everyone, all taxpayers in the town of Fairfield. So like everyone else, I want to thank you for your leadership, your patience with me, your graciousness, and your humility. And I have to say, I admire it as someone who has to deal with the corporate world every day. I certainly admire your leadership. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. And I just, want to continue. Yeah, I thank you all for our working relationship and our friendship. Every single one of us, all nine members or 8 members. Tom's on, Tom Flynn. He served as our chair for 10 years. I was vice chair, I think, for 8 of those 8 years. Yeah, 8 years. Mr. Bolito was vice chair for a couple years. And Tom, I want to thank you for your counsel, your advice, and your friendship, because, it's different, I have to say, being chair. So whoever's the next chair, it takes a lot. It does take a lot of homework. You just need to be prepared and just do the best you can. And it's nice to call on someone and say, how did you handle this? What did you do here? And sometimes, what does this even mean? And so, Tom, I appreciate your, just the fact that you were there and everything that you've done for this town as well.
Downtown Jimmy Brown, the godfather of finance for the town of Fairfield. You've done a great job as the chair, and it's been my pleasure to watch how you've managed the board through everything. Quite frankly, there's a little bit of me that feels like a big brother, even though I will remind you, you are older. But to watch your accomplishments and watch how you led the board was truly remarkable. You will be missed, my friend, in the role, but I won't miss you because I'll see you very soon. So God bless. Thanks for all the hard work. And just so I can remind everybody on this call, Mr. Brown leaves the town in an $8 million flush position. So it is your responsibility to keep it there and not spend all that money that Mr. Brown has bequeathed you as he exits the door. So
That's a good point. I think I might keep this document.
Put it up on your
frame
wall.
it. Congratulations, James. Well done, my friend.
All right, thank you, Tom. And Jared, we talked. I want to thank you. Caitlin, you too. You're on here, and I appreciate, you taking my calls as well, especially during budget season, sometimes 3-4 times a day, and answering the same questions you answered the year before, I'm sure. So appreciate your time and patience. And Jennifer Carpenter, I don't want to forget Jennifer, our assistant clerk, and she's always available. I appreciate she's done through. Dave Kelly, are you on? Thank you for dealing with these meetings every single time that we have them, and of course FairTV. So I could go on forever, And I see Pam's on. Thanks, Pam. She's another person that has done a lot of work for our town. Hey, Pam, and I appreciate your friendship as well.
You're going to be very, very missed. You did a fantastic job from all of us at the RTM. I don't think anybody will mind speaking for them, saying that we really admired the work and working with you.
And thank you, Pam, and same here. So, Mr. DeWitt, appreciate you getting on too, Pam. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It has been my sincere pleasure to be your vice chairman for 2 years. It's also been my pleasure to be your Board of Finance colleague for your 12 years. It's been wonderful. I very much appreciate everything you've done for this board. I will always remember you as a very thoughtful leader. Behind the scenes, the vice chairman and chairman talk a lot. And I would call Jim Monday at 2 o'clock and we would talk about something. He said, I'll get back to you. And Jim always wanted to contemplate, what is my answer? And I always thought that at the beginning it's like, well, can't we just answer? But I realized that it's just thoughtful leadership, and it's been very much appreciated by me, and it'll be missed by me. And as my last official act as the vice chairman of the Board of Finance, the Board of Finance would like to present to Mr. Brown. I know it's really hard to see, but I'll read the inscription. The Fairfield Board of Finance wishes to thank member James B. Brown for his 12 years of impeccable service, including his outstanding leadership as its chairman, dated November 16th, 2021. So congratulations, my friend. I'll make sure I get this to you in one piece, and thank you for your service to the town.
Well, thank you. I wish we could have met in person tonight. I'd shake everyone's hand and wish you well in person. So, but I appreciate that. I appreciate that plaque, and it'll go in a place in my house. I think I'll stick it right in our living room. I'll ask my wife. Right above the fireplace, so I can take a look at it. So thank you. I appreciate that. And when you start thanking people, I'm going to forget others, but just you know, again, I appreciate everyone I've worked with, Tom Bremer, who I see on there, and appreciate the work you do, Tom. So look, and I do want to thank the town residents too, that keep us, you know, that keep us moving, keep us hopping, you know, and the emails and all the input that they give us. And it's a town where people care, and they're going to let us know how they feel on many different subjects. So it's very helpful to us. And want the town residents to know that we, as a board and all our boards, appreciate their input. So it's my pleasure. I wish the next board that will come together December 5th. I think the swearing in is on the 22nd.
Hey, Jim,
Best of luck. Yes.
it's Tom. Just before you leave, I think the one thing that we sometimes forget to thank is our spouses and the kids. And to Meg and to your daughters for sharing you with the town for 12 years, we owe them thanks for their work on our behalf.
Absolutely. And I'll do that. I'll thank Meg. Yeah, especially, you know, over the years when during budget season, we walk out of the house and there's still homework to be done and everything else that we all need to do. So, yep, I appreciate her support. And I think it's actually, in some ways, a good lesson for our kids to see us, you know, serving in some way.
Now Meg's gonna have to keep you occupied.
Yeah. Yes, right. Keep plenty of nice, but it's something that maybe, you know, our kids get involved in at some point too. So, but again, I wish our board, the next Board of Finance, all the luck. And, you know, my hope is that the board keeps working together. And we just continue to find solutions for this town. And again, I'll just thank Brenda again for her words at the beginning of the night. And I appreciate everything that she's trying to do and the fact that we've been able to work together. So with that, we'll see you guys soon, just on a different venue. And we'll go to item number 8. Motion to adjourn. My last motion to adjourn. My last motion as chair, Mr. Walsh, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Chair Vitale, thank you too. Appreciate you. Appreciate you being on here. Good night, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a good night. Happy
Have a good
Thanksgiving,
night.
everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.